Welcome. I'd like to welcome you. My name is Ed Valentine, and we're going to be doing effective storytelling using the CARS method. There is a longer, full-sized workshop, which I would heartily encourage you to participate in, particularly if you've seen this and you have further questions. It provides an opportunity for you to do some more practice, get great feedback, and you'll get to learn from other people's CARS. So it's a great time, and it's well worth your time. Also note that there is a link inside the description to a worksheet that you can use as you're building your CAR, so you don't have to reference just the slides that you see. All that said, let's get started. We're going to talk about why you use a CAR, why it's a powerful method, then what you do to build your CAR. Finally, you'll have a couple of minutes to pull offline and think about the achievement that you want to write for your first CAR. There'll be a brief discussion about some of the things that you can do to make your CAR more easily listened to and clearer. Then we'll have a time where you can stop and draft your first CAR. And then we'll talk about the process of trial testing. You're doing your first test drive on your CAR, putting it in front of a listener and seeing what's being communicated. A CAR is designed to be a communication tool. And because of that, it works to the level that your audience gets the point that you want to get across. And so the way that you test it is to have somebody else listen. And then we'll talk about next steps in sharing. You've heard it said before that human beings are natural storytellers, but we're going to work on the power of the fact that humans are natural story listeners. What we know about brain science is that a story helps us organize and connect with information in a different way than a list of bullet points. We hear it better, we retain it better, we have positive emotions around it. It creates a real emotional bond between the storyteller and the listener, and it answers questions that they have about who you are on an emotional and a rational level. So they tend to stick in the other person's memory even when the facts are long forgotten. The positive impression you make lingers, and that's a powerful tool as for a job hunt. Now, some of the things for you in terms of the CARS method that are benefits is as you're telling your CAR story, you're demonstrating your value clearly to others. Since every time you talk about one of your skills and how you used it, you use an I statement. So you identify and connect personally with your successes. You remember that you're the person who has these skills and you can benefit your employer. So it makes your confidence grow and it triggers interesting conversations. People get engaged. Now, where are the sorts of places that you're going to tell your CAR? You could, of course, tell it in a formal job interview when you're asked about a time that you used such and such skill. But you can also boil down your CARs and put them in your LinkedIn profile. The problem and the advantage with LinkedIn is that everybody's on it. So you have to create a distinctive brand. The CAR is an essence of your distinctive brand. So you can boil it down and say, I am a person who does this, and it'll capture people's attentions. You can also edit them tightly and make them into resume bullets. And of course, we've already talked about them in networking. A CAR packages the skills you want to use in your next job and your interests and the values that you bring whenever you're working in an engaging and attractive package. Now, how do you build a great story? You start with a past achievement that's meaningful to you. Thinking of what you've done and what you're proud of and what you thought was really something important, that's a good clue for how you're going to select your first CAR, because you want to talk about things you want to do more of and things you're proud of, because it connects deeply with who you are. So you remember a past meaningful achievement, and then you're going to be capturing and communicating a truth that you learned or something that you discovered in the process of doing this. And of course, as you describe how you go through your work, you reveal values about how you work and your special sauce and the choices you make and how you include people and what you're attuned to in your environment, it really does tell a great story about you. Now, the great story also helps the listener make the conclusions you want. That is, it allows them to make their own deductions about you. So you don't say you're collaborative or adaptive or leaderly. You tell them a story that shows the listeners you have these traits. So here's how we build it. You start with the C section, the circumstance or challenge. It's whatever problem you faced, why it needed to be fixed, and why it was your problem. And you need to end that section with the goal you wanted to achieve. Hint, you just give enough context to communicate the risk or opportunity and to make them curious about how you're going to solve it, because the next thing you're going to tell them is how you solved it. So you're going to walk them through step by step, clearly, individually. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. The first time you do this, I'll encourage you to be very detailed. That is, try to remember everything that you did, because everything that you did reveals an awareness or a skill or a value, and you may want to highlight that. And it's going to be harder when you wrap the story up in a sentence or two to remember all those details. So the first time, try to walk through it as much detail as you can. You can always edit it for your audience or situation. And in fact, the actions are ones that you either make big or small, depending on your listener. And then finally, the results. You want to start with what changed because you acted. Specifically, start with your goal. In the challenge, this is the goal I wanted to achieve. And in the results, you talk about, this is what we did against that goal. Hint, don't forget to add any additional benefits or other ways you helped. Did you create training manual? Did you build relationships with Linger? Did you document a procedure? There's going to be lots of things in a big, significant goal that you either learned or you had some sort of legacy impact on the organization. Don't ignore those. Those really are positive outcomes, and you can claim those. Where else, if you're having trouble, can you find a car story? Well, you can do this in a couple of different ways. You're going to be looking for information sources about skills or attributes. So some of those sources are going to be feedback and things that people tell you as you're networking about your talents or skills. And always listen for skills or talents that weren't obvious to you. And the reason you do that is they're already so much part of you. You're going to bring them to the next job. You've just forgotten that they're part of you. So always jot those down. You can work backwards from a job description. This job requires these skills, and think of, when did I demonstrate those skills? When have I used those? And think of that story as a car that you can develop. Certainly look at your strength finders or the Strong's assessment or whatever assessment tests that you use for highlights about what your skills are, and build your cars highlighting those. And then finally, if you've had performance reviews or letters of recommendation, be listening for the words that people use that were positive, that surprised you. These again are skills and attributes and talents and benefits you bring every time, which you bring just because you're you. And it's easy to forget those. So the question that you can ask about is, when have I demonstrated those skills? When in my life have I demonstrated those skills? So can I create a car around that? So now is our first break. I'm going to ask you to take a moment to reflect. 2 or 3 minutes is usually plenty. And I'll ask you to think about the proudest moment or the biggest challenge you've had in recent memory. Doesn't have to be real recent. I'm interested in something that's big, that you're proud of, and you think you did a really good job. And maybe, as you think about it, you did lots of different things. So you demonstrated lots of different skills. It can be in your work. It can be a non-for-profit. It can be a volunteer organization. So broaden the perspective, because your skills are with you no matter where you go. So think of one of those experiences. So take a moment, pause the video, and select this. And when we come back, we'll talk about how you start to build from that instinct to create a car. When you're done, please forward the video. And here we go. Here's our process. We're going to start, and our goal is to have a concise, digestible, memorable story. So you identify the proudest moment or challenge, you write it, you share and get feedback more than one time, and we'll talk about why. You edit it based on the feedback, and you refine it based on what points you want to specifically highlight, what you want to make sure people understand about you, and you repeat and evaluate. There's some key things just to be aware of as you're writing these, and some of these are very much like resume points, and that is you pay attention to the difference between active and passive voice. So in passive voice, every Friday the bagels were devoured by members of the late shift, and then active voice, every Friday the late shift devoured the bagels. You just want to make sure that it's real clear about who's doing everything, because you've got a story about what you do and how valuable you are to the employer. So you're going to be talking about your agency. Now the bottom of this talks about how you phrase something directly or indirectly about your role or work. My responsibility was to promote our site's programs. Well, that describes your responsibility, but you really need to get very quickly to what you actually did. Your car is going to be less about your job title and more about what you did. So you can ask yourself these questions. The 5 W's: what challenge you needed to solve, who needed to be involved. This is about who you convinced, who you collaborated with, how insightful you were about working the politics in the organization. When did it need to be done by? This creates urgency. It creates a threat. It tells you why that's important. Where can give you a sense of the scope. And then so what is always an important question to ask, because it means what happens if you aren't successful, and then quantify your achievement and result. So here's our second place. Now you can go and give yourself at least 15 minutes to do the first draft of a car. Your goal is to create a to-the-point, digestible story. So 15 minutes, get out a sheet of paper or your typewriter, your laptop or whatever, and start on it. Now, I'm going to show the next slide, which will be some writing prompts. And in that, you can use those to answer questions that you like. Keep this slide up as long as you want. Go back to earlier slides if you need. Okay? So give yourself 15 minutes or so, and when you come back, we'll move on. If you're ready, here we are. Before you share it the first time, you want to make sure that you've covered at least these bases, and these ones that we've already talked about. Did you get all the 5 W's in? And did you talk about how you quantify your achievement or result? Now, when you talk about quantifying your achievement or result, you may have situations where you can't give precise numbers. I think it's very honorable, and I think as an institutional researcher, it's actually more accurate if you can say, we increased sales by approximately 300%. That tells people the scope and roughly of the amount, but it doesn't hold you liable for 299% or 307% if you can't document it. And I like being able to say things in a job interview that are truthful and that are defensible. So I think being approximate is just fine. People understand that well, because you're not trying to communicate the precise number, you're trying to communicate the impact. So when you get feedback from your car, I'd ask you to ask somebody who knows you, probably somebody who knows you well, because in our workshop, we have somebody else who's in the class who can listen, but you're doing this online. So on the videos, so ask somebody who knows you to listen, and specifically, we want them to write down what they hear and to read and reflect that story back to you. You want to know what they understood. Ask them to identify talents or attributes or skills you successfully conveyed through your story. That's really the goal of the car, is to package your skills in a way that sticks with them positively. So that's the meat of the car. So help get an understanding of what you've been successfully conveying. Now the next three are for editing. What's the most compelling aspect of the car? What grabbed their attention, kept them interested? When were they on the edge of their seat? And let them know things that can help you edit. What needs more detail so they understand, and what needs less detail, where you seem to wander a bit and maybe didn't have to tell them as much. Now, as you complete your car and you want to share it more, pay attention to when you feel most excited. It's a good clue about what's really engaging you on the story. And more importantly, when you're excited and committed to telling your story, you're going to be fascinating. So pay attention to those things. You're not boring when you talk about things you love. Incorporate any edits or suggestions you get from your listener. Now, adjust and repeat, and understand that who you're talking to and the setting that you're talking to, you may get different responses. People pick up on different things. So more times you get in front of different kinds of people, you'll get a better sense of what they're listening for, what they don't know, what they do know, and what kind of questions they're going to have. And that will really help you see all of the ways that you can use your car and to use it flexibly depending on who you're at, which means you could answer more completely in a job interview, or you can answer in a minute in an elevator. It's just, you do this by repeating in different settings and getting feedback. And then the last thing I would say is, you've got your big car first. You've got a big achievement. There may be some smaller achievements embedded in that are actual projects. We had a problem. I did some things. I solved it. That can be a mini car that highlight a particular skill. Your project management, your convincing skills, your persuasive skills, or your training skills, or your flexibility skills. There might be a little car in there that you can pull out as another tool in your tool set. So be aware of those, because you probably are more skilled than you think. How many cars do you need? Well, again, the goal of a car story is designed to demonstrate your skills in a positive and engaging format. So for every skill that you want in a new job that you have some experience with, you'll need a car that shows how you use that skill to benefit your employer or your organization. It's hard first. You may have skills that you've used and you don't want to use anymore. Well, don't have a car that highlights them. Don't market yourself for jobs you don't want. But more than that, you want to target what you're marketing about yourself to the people that are listening to you. So again, for every skill you've got, you want to market, you'll need to have a car that shows it. So you can have 4 cars or 10 cars or 20 cars, but one for every one of those skills that you want to bring to a new job. Tips and takeaway. What makes a good car? It needs to be concise, which you'll get by reviewing and editing and doing trial testing with other listeners. It'll be digestible. You'll get that from feedback. And of course, because it's in a story format, it will be memorable. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. There's a lot of times that you can share these with coaches and peers, particularly if in other CTC settings. Everybody in CTC, I would think, at some point is going to be working on their car. So they'll understand the process you're in, and they may very well have been in the workshop. So you're going to have a good, informed, and helpful audience. So share and review those with coaches and peers. Do everything you can to support and help each other. When people share their cars with you, give them feedback that's helpful. Be listening, be an active listener, and affirm the things that you've communicated, and check on the things that you think they might be trying to get across but haven't quite. And then you can use them in other CT settings, like refining your pitch, the peer group, in your coaching sessions, in the mock video interview, and so forth. Thank you. I appreciate your attentiveness to all of this. I would ask that you please consider the complete workshop. In it, you not only get this, but you get real-time feedback from a friendly listener, and you learn from hearing other people's cars. In the process of doing back and forth, we have all of the questions that you'd have that you'd bring get answered, and all of the questions that everyone else brings, you get to hear. So it's a very rich environment, and people enjoy it generally very much. So have a wonderful day, and thank you again for your time and attention. My email is at the front of the slides. It's edwardvalentine@ameritech.net. And if you've seen this video and something wasn't clear to you, or you have another question, just drop me a note. I would be glad to help. Thank you again.